Summer 1462. The sun hangs heavy over the Danube plains as tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers march north, confident, disciplined, and utterly certain of victory. These are the same men who shattered the walls of Constantinople, who burned their way across kingdoms, who believe no force on earth can stop them. Wallachia, a tiny principality wedged between mountains and river, should have been nothing more than a brief campaign, another trophy on their march toward Europe. But as the column pushes deeper into the countryside, something changes. The air, once dry and warm, suddenly feels thick, tainted. Horses begin to snort and pull at their reins. Veterans wrinkle their noses, and then it hits them. A stench so overwhelming it seems to crawl down the throat and settle on the tongue. Rot, decay, heat, and something far worse that none of them can name. The front ranks slow. Scouts stop dead in their tracks. A nervous silence spreads across the army. There are no enemies in sight, no sign of battle, no smoke, no walls, nothing. Just a hill ahead, its crest shimmering under the oppressive sunlight. Then they climb it and freeze. Below them stretches a sight so monstrous that even the most battle-hardened soldiers feel their knees weaken. A forest, but the trees are not trees at all. They are human beings. Thousands upon thousands, mounted on wooden stakes, arranged in perfect geometric rows stretching for nearly 2 miles. Some bodies are bloated and blackened by weeks of exposure. Others still twitch, still breathe, still scream. These are their comrades, men captured in earlier raids, men who marched beside them only days ago. Now they sway in the hot wind like grotesque banners, an entire landscape of agony carved into the earth with impossible precision. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of empires, rides to the front and stops. For a long moment he says nothing. The most feared ruler in the world, a man who had watched cities crumble under his cannons, now gazes upon something crafted not by madness, but by intent. Here, in the heart of Wallachia, he recognizes the message. Turn back. This land belongs to a different kind of enemy. And without a word, Mehmed orders the retreat. The campaign has barely begun. And already, Wallachia has shown its true weapon, terror shaped into strategy. To understand how a man could create something as monstrous as the forest of the impaled, we have to travel back 20 years to the winter of 1442, a moment when a single decision shattered a boy's world forever. Vlad is only 11 when his father, Vlad II Dracula, the ruler of Wallachia, is forced into making an impossible bargain. To keep his throne and avoid invasion, he must hand over his 2 youngest sons, Vlad and his brother Radu, to the Ottoman Empire as living collateral, not guests, not students, hostages. The boys are taken from their homeland and delivered into the heart of the Ottoman world. But they aren't locked in dungeons. Instead, they are placed inside the glittering palaces of Edirne and later Adrianople. Marble halls, silks, tutors, elite training, everything a prince could want. But beneath that beauty lies something far more sinister. This is not an education. It is conditioning. The Ottomans rule through fear, and they teach through fear. Executions aren't hidden, they are staged, in courtyards for maximum psychological effect. Torture is slow, methodical, performed in front of crowds to send a message. This is what defiance earns you. Vlad watches it all, day after day, year after year. Radu adapts quickly. He learns the language, earns praise, even becomes close to the Sultan's son, the young Mehmed. But Vlad refuses to bend. He talks back. He resists. He burns with hatred he can't hide. For his defiance, he is beaten, humiliated, and according to some court records, possibly tortured. Those years don't break him. They sculpt him. Every punishment he sees, every technique of domination he witnesses, becomes another piece of knowledge stored deep inside his mind. He studies cruelty the way others study philosophy. He memorizes exactly how fear spreads through a crowd. He learns against his will that terror, applied correctly, can bend nations. By the time he's released at 17, Vlad is no longer simply a prince returning home. He is something both sharper and darker. His childhood innocence has been carved away, leaving behind a young man who understands how power works in its rawest form. He leaves Ottoman territory not as a victim, but as an apprentice of fear, carrying a blueprint for vengeance that will one day make empires tremble. When Vlad finally returned to Wallachia at 17, he carried with him a mind sharpened by fear, punishment, and years of watching cruelty turned into strategy. But he returned to a homeland that no longer existed. Within 2 months, his world collapsed again. His father, Vlad II Dracula, the man who had bargained his son's freedom for peace, was betrayed and murdered by the very boyar nobles who pretended to serve him, and Vlad's older brother, Mircea, suffered an even worse fate, seized by these same nobles and buried alive. The message to young Vlad was unmistakable. Wallachia devours its own, and if he wanted to survive, he could never allow himself to be powerless again. With no allies and surrounded by men who would gladly finish the job, Vlad fled into exile. But this exile wasn't passivity, it was preparation. For 6 long years he drifted between courts, learning strategy from Hungarian commanders, studying politics, absorbing every lesson on betrayal, loyalty, fear, and the fragile nature of power. Everything he had been taught in the Ottoman courts began to take shape inside him. Terror, he realized, wasn't just a weapon. It was the weapon. In 1456, with Hungarian backing and a ruthlessness forged by trauma, Vlad seized the Wallachian throne. He returned not as a boy molded by empires, but as a man determined to reshape his country through the same fear that had shaped him. His coronation feast should have been a celebration. Instead, it became a reckoning. The boyars, those same nobles who had murdered his father and buried his brother, came dressed in jewels and velvet, smiling as they boasted about how many princes they had outlived. Some had survived 10, 12 rulers. They thought this new one would be no different. Vlad listened. He smiled. And then he gave the order. The boyars were seized on the spot. The elderly nobles, the architects of his family's destruction, were marched outside the castle walls and impaled, slowly and methodically, their screams rising over the celebration drums. The younger ones were stripped of their finery and forced to march 50 brutal miles to the ruins of Puanari fortress. There, Vlad ordered them to rebuild the citadel with their bare hands. Many died hauling stones up the mountainside. The survivors carried their obedience like chains. Vlad hadn't taken revenge, he had cleansed Wallachia. He erased the old aristocracy and replaced it with a new truth. Loyalty was survival. Fear was law. Vlad was absolute. By 1459, Vlad had carved a new Wallachia out of the ashes of the old. His enemies feared him. His people obeyed him. But beyond his borders, a storm was gathering. Sultan Mehmed II, the same young man who once studied beside Vlad in the Ottoman court, now ruled an empire stretching from the Black Sea to the gates of Europe, and he demanded submission. That year, Mehmed sent envoys to Wallachia with a simple message. Pay tribute. Renew your oath of loyalty. Present yourself in Constantinople. For most rulers, this was routine diplomacy. For Vlad, it was an insult sharpened by memory. When the envoys entered his court, they refused to remove their turbans. This wasn't arrogance, it was genuine Ottoman religious protocol. Vlad asked about their custom, his voice polite, almost curious. The envoys explained, relieved that he seemed receptive. Then Vlad smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but like a man who had already decided their fate. I respect your devotion, he said. Allow me to help you honor it forever. At his signal, guards seized the envoys. Nails were driven through the turbans and into their skulls, not enough to kill, but enough to ensure unbearable suffering. Their screams echoed through the halls, as they staggered, bloody, terrified, and very much alive. And then Vlad sent them home. Witnesses claimed the men ran screaming across the countryside, tearing at their own heads in agony. When Mehmed finally saw the men he had entrusted with diplomacy, now stumbling into his palace half-mad, he understood that the child he once knew had become something far more dangerous. War was no longer a possibility. It was guaranteed. But Vlad wasn't finished sending messages. He had spent years perfecting the art of impalement, turning it from crude execution into a nightmarish science. Using angled stakes, oiled wood, and carefully chosen entry points, he ensured his victims survived for hours, sometimes days. Their agony wasn't a side effect, it was the point. And then came the staging. Vlad arranged impaled bodies in rows, spirals, circles, and towering formations visible from miles away. Roads, village squares, and city gates became galleries of suffering. Each display was a declaration. Defy me, and this will be your fate. Human agony became his language. Terror became his signature. And all of Europe was about to learn how far he was willing to take it. By the spring of 1462, the Ottoman Empire had reached its breaking point. For years, Vlad had raided across the Danube with a ferocity that stunned even hardened veterans. Entire garrisons vanished. Villages burned. According to Vlad's own chilling reports, more than 20,000 Ottomans had died by his hand. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, no longer saw Vlad as a rebellious vassal. He saw him as an infection that had to be cut out. And so he assembled one of the largest forces ever sent into the Balkans, 60,000 to 90,000 men, an army larger than the entire male population of Wallachia. There was no scenario in which Vlad could defeat that army in open battle. But Vlad did not plan to fight a battle. He planned to break an empire. As the Ottomans crossed into Wallachian territory, they found nothing. Villages silent, houses abandoned, fields scorched, wells poisoned, livestock gone, forest after forest stripped empty. Vlad had ordered every man, woman, and child to retreat into the mountains, taking everything movable with them and destroying everything else. The greatest army in the world marched into a country that had been turned into a graveyard. Food ran low, water sources vanished. The summer heat baked the soldiers inside their armor. Horses collapsed from exhaustion. And just when they began to hope the worst was over, the nights came alive. At first, it was small things. A fire in the distance. A scream from a sentry tower. A missing patrol. Then the truth emerged. Vlad's raiders were everywhere. Under moonlight, small groups of Wallachian fighters slipped like phantoms through the Ottoman lines. No drums, no banners, no warnings. They struck fast, cutting down isolated guards, torching supply wagons, stampeding horses, disappearing before the camp could react. Some disguised themselves in captured Ottoman uniforms. Others spoke just enough Turkish to confuse the panicked soldiers. It wasn't warfare. It was psychological demolition. Men woke to flames devouring tents. Commanders shouted contradictory orders in the chaos. Soldiers attacked shadows or each other. Every night brought new losses. Every morning the army rose more exhausted than before. Vlad didn't need to destroy the Ottoman force. He only needed to make them afraid of the dark. And he was succeeding. By mid-June of 1462, the Ottoman invasion of Wallachia had already turned into a march through hell. Vlad's scorched earth tactics had stripped the land bare, and the nightly raids gnawed at the nerves of even the toughest janissaries. But nothing compared to what was coming next. On the night of June 17th, Vlad took the greatest gamble of his life. He gathered nearly 10,000 of his best fighters, men who knew every ravine, every shadow, every animal path through the forests. And then he issued an order that chilled them even as they obeyed it. Dress like Ottomans. Captured uniforms were distributed: red gold turbans, leather steel armor, curved sabers. Under the cloak of darkness, Vlad's army transformed into a ghostly mirror image of the force they were about to attack. The Ottoman camp stretched for miles, lit only by scattered fires and lanterns. Horses nickered in their sleep. Commanders murmured over maps. Tens of thousands of men rested under the illusion of safety because, after all, who would dare strike the Sultan himself? Vlad would. When the Wallachians slipped into the outer edges of the camp, not a sound betrayed them, not a snapped twig, not a whispered word. Then, at Vlad's signal, the world erupted. Tents exploded into flames. Horses reared and screamed. Raiders shouted orders in fluent Turkish, sending panic rippling through the ranks as soldiers could no longer tell friend from foe. In the chaos, Janissaries clashed with their own cavalry, convinced they were under attack from within. Vlad pressed forward relentlessly, carving a path through the chaos straight toward the Sultan's pavilion. Some accounts, half history, half legend, claim that in the flickering inferno, Vlad and Mehmed briefly saw each other across the fire, their faces lit by the same flame, two men bound by fate and hatred. But the Janissaries held. Forming a human barrier around their Sultan, they absorbed the full weight of Vlad's attack. For hours, the battle raged through smoke and fire until Vlad realized the truth. He could strike fear into the heart of the empire, but he could not kill it tonight. He gave the order to retreat. Ottoman casualties remained debated, but the psychological impact was absolute. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire had nearly been assassinated in the middle of his own army. And after that night, every soldier who survived understood one thing. Vlad the Impaler was not fighting for victory. He was fighting for terror. By late June of 1462, the Ottoman army was unraveling. Weeks of scorched earth, poisoned wells, and relentless night raids had left soldiers half-starved, exhausted, and unsure if Vlad's forces were even human. The march toward Târgoviște, the Wallachian capital, felt like moving deeper into a nightmare. But the true horror had not yet revealed itself. As dawn broke over the rolling hills outside the city, the columns slowed. Horses snorted and refused to advance. Veterans wiped sweat from their brows, confused by a strange, sickening heaviness in the air. Then a wind shifted, and an odor rolled down the hillside so thick, so foul, it tasted like rot on the tongue. They had smelled death before, but not like this. Then they climbed the last hill. What they saw below was not a battlefield. It was an apocalypse given form. Stretching for nearly 2 miles in length and half a mile in width, stood the infamous forest of the impaled tens of thousands of bodies mounted on towering wooden stakes. Some were weeks old, swollen and blackened under the summer sun. Others were fresher, their skin pale and taut, and some were still moving, still breathing, still trapped in unspeakable agony. The arrangement was not chaotic. It was deliberate, mathematically precise. Rows, rings, spirals, star-shaped formations, patterns engineered for maximum psychological destruction. The entire landscape had been transformed into a gallery of human suffering, each stake a message, each corpse a sentence, in Vlad's language of fear. Hardened soldiers, men who had stormed walls, survived sieges, and slaughtered countless enemies, fell to their knees and vomited. Others staggered backward in shock. Some broke ranks and ran, choosing desertion over marching another step into that hellish display. And at the very center of it all, towering above the others, was the stake holding Hamza Pasha, one of Mehmed's most respected commanders. His body, still adorned in pieces of fine Ottoman armor, faced the road directly positioned so the Sultan would see him first. When Mehmed II finally reached the front and gazed upon the spectacle, he sat frozen in his saddle. After a long silence, he whispered words his generals would never forget. "It is impossible to subdue a man capable of such deeds." Within days, the order was given. The great Ottoman army, the most powerful force on earth, retreated. Not defeated in battle, defeated by pure, calculated terror. Vlad's greatest victory, turning back the most powerful army on earth, should have secured his legacy forever. But terror is a weapon that cuts both ways, and once unleashed, it becomes almost impossible to sheathe. After the Ottomans retreated, something inside Vlad shifted. The tactics he forged during war became his entire identity. Fear wasn't just a tool anymore, it was the only language he knew. And soon, he began speaking it everywhere. Merchants accused of cheating were impaled along the roads leading into the capital. Boyars suspected of disloyalty, sometimes on nothing more than rumor, vanished overnight. Entire villages that failed to pay taxes or obey orders found themselves punished with the same brutal logic Vlad had once reserved for invaders. The terror that had defended Wallachia now began consuming it from within. Alliances crumbled. Even those who once admired Vlad's iron resolve now whispered about instability, madness, or something worse. Into this chaos stepped his younger brother Radu, handsome, charismatic, and backed by Ottoman money, Ottoman soldiers, and Ottoman promises. He presented himself as the reasonable choice, the prince who would bring order without bloodshed. Wallachia listened. By late 1462, Vlad was forced to flee into Transylvania, where he sought refuge with King Matthias of Hungary, an ally he believed would protect him. Instead, in one of history's most ironic betrayals, Matthias had him arrested. Whether out of political convenience, forged evidence, or fear of Vlad's growing infamy, the Hungarian king kept him imprisoned for 12 long years. But the monster Matthias expected never appeared. During captivity, Vlad behaved calmly, even marrying a Hungarian noblewoman and fathering children. Yet beneath the surface, the fire still smoldered. In 1476, Wallachia plunged into chaos once more, and powerful neighbors needed a strong hand to stabilize the region. Vlad was released and restored to the throne. For a moment, it seemed the Impaler's legend would rise again. But fate had other plans. Within months, Vlad died in battle, cut down either by Ottoman soldiers or, as some whispered, by his own men who mistook him for the enemy in the frenzy. His head was sent to Constantinople, preserved and displayed as a final humiliation. His body vanished, his grave lost to time. Romania remembers him as a defender. The world knows him as Dracula. But the truth is more chilling than myth. Vlad's terror wasn't insanity. It was strategy, cold, trained, perfected. And the darkest part? It worked. Fear turned back an empire,